The cave had been a spot locals avoided, though none of us really knew why. It was tucked away behind a cluster of overgrown pines, half hidden by years of neglect and leaf litter. The air outside was still that evening, the kind of stillness that makes every sound sharper, every snap of a twig echoing like gunfire. I remember the first time we stumbled upon it, a dark gaping moss set into the earth like it had been carved by something deliberately sinister. We were three friends, looking for a little adventure, a break from the monotony of our small Appalachian town. Headlamps in hand, we stepped inside, the temperature dropping immediately, carrying the damp, mineral-heavy smell that clung to our clothes and hair. The walls felt unnervingly close, jagged stone pressing against our shoulders as we moved deeper. I could feel the weight of the mountain above us, the stillness almost suffocating. The passage we followed twisted in ways that made the map we had almost useless. My headlamp flickered once, twice, then steadied, but each time the light faltered, shadows seemed to stretch and twist unnaturally across the rock. It was subtle at first, a shadow that didn't quite match the shape of my arm, a glint in the stone that disappeared when I blinked, but enough to set a creeping edge to my nerves. And then came the whisper. At first, I thought it was the wind, the natural shifting of air through the caverns. But it was deliberate, soft and urgent, like someone speaking from just behind my shoulder. I spun around, but my friends were absorbed in the passage ahead, oblivious, or pretending not to notice. The voice didn't belong to any of us, and it wasn't random. It repeated faint words I couldn't make out, punctuated by a sense of urgency I couldn't ignore. Curiosity pushed us forward, even as unease prickled at every nerve. The whispering grew steadier, insistent, pulling us down a side passage we hadn't noticed on our map. It was narrower, the walls closing in, forcing us to crouch, our boots scraping wet stone. I reached out to steady myself against the wall and felt a cold draft brush past my shoulder, subtle but unmistakable. I turned sharply, half expecting to see one of my friends or some wild animal, but there was nothing, just stone, and the whispering clearer now in my own ears, but still silent to the others. I whispered, "Did you hear that?" But my words seemed to vanish in the cave's damp air. My friends shook their heads, smiling nervously, and pressed onward. We found a hollow further down, a small chamber with a ceiling that opened slightly to the darkness above. The air was icy, biting through our jackets and clothes, and I felt the first genuine twinge of fear. I crouched near the center, headlamp illuminating jagged stones and damp walls, and the whispering didn't stop. It was as if the cave itself had a voice, calling to me, tugging at some part of my mind I hadn't known existed. Each sound resonated deep in my skull, indistinct words shaping into the vaguest form of sentences I almost understood. My friends were busy examining a narrow tunnel leading out of the hollow, completely unaware of the sensations pressing against me from the darkness. Something brushed my shoulder again, stronger this time, and I yelped, spinning around. Nothing. The tension built steadily, like water rising slowly in a well, pressing in from all sides. My senses sharpened. The way the air moved, the subtle shift in temperature, the faint smell of damp earth and something else, something almost metallic. Every instinct screamed to leave, yet a part of me, a dangerous, foolish part, wanted to see it through. The whispering had a strange magnetism, the kind that makes you ignore rational thought and follow wherever it leads. We moved slowly, cautiously, deeper into the cave, the walls pressing closer, shadows dancing across them as our lights flickered. I tried to keep conversation alive, asking questions, but the words felt hollow, swallowed by the oppressive air. My heartbeat roared in my ears, louder than anything else. At some point, I realized we weren't entirely alone. There were subtle signs, small scratches along the stone, displaced pebbles in formations we hadn't disturbed, a faint smell like burnt wood lingering in a corner that had no fire. I mentioned it to my friends, but they laughed nervously, brushing it off. Yet I could see the tension in their eyes, the subtle way they glanced over their shoulders, quickening their pace. The whispering continued, now at the edges of my perception, merging with the sound of our own breathing and the drip of water somewhere deep in the cave. I stopped counting footsteps, stopped noticing the map. All that existed was the dark, the cold, and that impossible pull of sound that I couldn't explain. Finally, we found our way back to the opening, crawling out into the silver light of the moon. It was high, pale, casting long shadows across the forest floor. My friends were silent, faces ashen, their usual humor and chatter gone. We didn't speak of what had followed us back, but the sense of being watched lingered. Even then, hours later, walking back to town, I could feel it. The weight of unseen eyes, a presence too deliberate to be random. I kept glancing over my shoulder, half expecting to see something emerge from the tree line, some part of the cave that had followed us. Sleep came fitfully that night, haunted by whispers that I swear existed even in the daylight, lingering in the quiet moments when no one else was around. To this day, I can't explain what we heard in that cave, or why the air itself seemed to speak to me. My friends try to laugh it off, chalk it up to nerves or imagination, but I know better. There's something in the Appalachian hills that doesn't belong to our world, something patient and silent, waiting in the dark, just beneath the surface. The cave wasn't merely empty space. It was alive in some way I can't articulate, aware of our trespass, marking us for reasons I may never understand. I never went back, and I can't say I want to, but sometimes when the wind shifts in the mountains, I swear I hear it again. The whispering, soft and insistent, calling my name, reminding me that some darkness doesn't stay buried. I'd been feeling restless for weeks, trapped in that tiny Appalachian town where everyone knew each other's business, and the hills pressed in like a living weight. The cave system on the edge of the forest had always called to me, not for adventure, not for thrills, but as a place where the noise of life couldn't reach me, a place where I could disappear, even if only for a few hours. I remember that morning clearly. The air was crisp, the mist still clinging to the trees, the forest floor slick with fallen leaves and dew. I packed a small backpack, flashlight, extra batteries, water, and set off alone, my boots sinking into the soft, damp earth as I followed the faint trail that led to the cave's yawning entrance. Once inside, the world shifted. The sunlight vanished immediately, swallowed by the cavern's wide mouth, leaving only the sharp cone of my flashlight cutting through the darkness. The air was heavy, carrying the smell of wet stone and something earthy, almost organic, like the forest itself had been pressed into the rock. The tunnels twisted unpredictably, splitting and curving in ways that made the map I'd memorized almost useless. I moved cautiously, careful not to trip on the uneven floor, my heart beat loud in my own ears. At first, it was just the silence that was unsettling, the kind that presses against your mind until every drip of water, every faint scrape of rock against rock seems magnified. Then I heard it, or thought I did. A soft footstep behind me, echoing faintly against the stone. I froze, holding my breath, trying to convince myself it was the sound of my own boots, reverberating strangely in the narrow tunnel. But then it came again, delayed just enough to suggest it wasn't mine. I stopped completely, flashlight trembling in my hand, listening to the echo fade. Nothing. Just the emptiness. I forced a laugh, shaking my head, telling myself I was imagining things, letting my nerves get the better of me. I pressed on, the beam of light bouncing along the jagged walls, guiding me deeper into the labyrinth. That's when the knocks started. Soft at first, deliberate, almost musical in their timing. One knock for each step I took. I froze, heart hammering in my chest, and lifted my flashlight toward the source, trying to pierce the darkness. The sound came from a side passage I hadn't noticed, a narrow slit in the rock, too small for me to enter. I didn't understand it at first. I wanted to convince myself it was just the cave settling, water dripping onto stone, but the rhythm was too precise, too intentional. Panic began to creep in. Each knock matched my own steps as I moved, echoing from deeper and deeper within the tunnels, keeping pace with me as though the cave itself were walking alongside me. I ran. My boots slipped on the wet stone, my flashlight bouncing wildly, illuminating patches of wall and puddles of water that reflected fractured light. Shadows flickered in the beam, moving independently, refusing to stay where they should. That's when I saw it, a shape at the edge of the light, indistinct and crouched, yet undeniably there. My stomach dropped. I yelled, though no one could hear me, my own voice swallowed by the cavern. The shape vanished instantly, leaving only the cold, oppressive darkness. I scrambled forward, hands scraping against the rough walls, the echo of my own steps merging with the mysterious knocks that refused to stop. I don't remember how long I ran. Minutes, maybe an hour. Every turn looked the same. Every passage seemed to loop back on itself. I thought I might never find the entrance again. My lungs burned, my heart slammed against my ribs, and the weight of the cave pressed down on me from all sides. The knocks followed relentlessly, unyielding, responding to each step as though they knew my path before I did. I tried shouting, calling for anyone, or anything that might be there, but my words dissolved in the tunnel, useless against whatever watched me. Somewhere in the middle of the chaos, I lost my footing. I slid across slick rock, scraping my hands and knees, the flashlight spinning in a perfect arc that sent a beam across the far wall. That's when I saw it again, a shadow, fleeting but unmistakable, moving faster than it should have been able to, closer than my imagination could account for. My chest tightened, cold sweat running down my back. I forced myself to stand, ignoring the throbbing pain in my limbs, and kept moving, guided only by instinct and the dim hope that the entrance was near. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, I saw it, a faint slit of moonlight cutting through the forest canopy, spilling into the mouth of the cave. Relief hit me like a physical blow. I stumbled, scraping my palms on the wet earth, and burst into the open, lungs burning, chest heaving. The forest greeted me with quiet indifference, leaves rustling gently in the night breeze, as if nothing had followed me out. But I knew better. My eyes kept darting into the darkness, searching for the shadow, the thing that had mirrored my steps, the presence I couldn't explain. My flashlight lay forgotten at the cave's mouth, flickering weakly, abandoned. I never returned. I never spoke of what happened, except in murmurs to myself when the wind shifted just right, or when the silence of the forest felt too heavy. Nights in my small cabin were restless, haunted by the memory of footsteps that weren't mine, of deliberate knocks keeping pace with mine, of a shadow that moved in ways a human body couldn't. Even now, years later, when I walk past the forest edge, I feel the weight of the cave, the sense that it's waiting, patient, silent, and entirely aware of those who dare to enter. Some part of me wonders if it remembers my steps, if it's still following, echoing, hiding just beyond the reach of the trees. The fear never fully leaves, only subsides enough to let me live in denial, until the memory presses in again, and the echoes of that night remind me that some places are meant to be left alone. I remember the first time we found that crevice. It was barely wide enough to squeeze through, wedged between two jagged outcroppings that jutted from the hillside like the ribs of some long-dead beast. No one in town talked about it, not openly. Older folks would give a half-smile and mutter about how some caves weren't meant for eyes to see, how certain spaces held the weight of old things better left alone. But curiosity, or perhaps foolishness, pulled us forward that morning. I was with two friends, both equally eager, and together we pried ourselves into the narrow opening. The moment I was inside, the temperature dropped sharply. My breath came out in frosty clouds, mingling with the stale, mineral-heavy air. The walls were slick with condensation, pressed so close I could feel every groove against my skin. We moved slowly, almost crawling, every sound amplified. The scrape of boots against rock, the faint drip of water somewhere deeper, the subtle hiss of our own breathing. And then it came, a cold gust from somewhere beyond the narrow passage. It wasn't just the shift of air through the cave. It was deliberate, sudden, carrying a faint, almost imperceptible scent of decay. I froze, my hand clutching the rock as I listened. "Did you feel that?" I whispered, my voice bouncing faintly back at me. My friends nodded, silent, their faces pale in the dim light of our headlamps. We pressed on, and that's when it happened. I called out, expecting an echo to respond with the usual distortion of sound in a cave. But what returned was different. Soft, deliberate, almost intimate. It was my own name, whispered from somewhere deep in the chamber ahead. I spun, shining my light in every direction, but there was nothing. Just the cold, the shadows, and the pressing walls that seemed to inch closer with each step. My instincts screamed at me to turn back, to leave immediately, but I couldn't. Not yet. The chamber beckoned, a dark heart in the belly of the mountain, promising answers, or perhaps something far worse. As we crawled into the main chamber, the air became so cold it burned our lungs, and the shadows stretched unnaturally along the walls. The floor was uneven, littered with small stones and what looked like fragments of old timber, remnants of someone, or something that had been here long before us. I reached out to steady myself against a wall, and my fingertips brushed against a slick patch of moss that clung to the stone. For a moment, it felt alive under my touch, as though the cave itself was testing us, pressing back against our intrusion. We found a small hollow, tucked into a corner where the ceiling dropped low. The light from our headlamps barely reached it, and a cold wind poured from the space like the breath of some unseen creature. It smelled faintly of rot, but it was difficult to place, organic, ancient, and impossibly old. I knelt near the hollow's entrance, heart hammering, every instinct screaming at me to leave. And yet, I wanted to see inside, to know what the wind had carried. The whispering came again, softer this time, almost patient, as if inviting me to step closer. My friends were silent behind me, their hesitation mirrored in the tight grip of their hands on their own lights. Something shifted in the corner of my vision. I turned sharply, flashlight sweeping across the chamber, and saw only jagged walls, shadows that seemed to twitch unnaturally, though I could tell they were not moving on their own. My breath came faster, clouding the already frigid air. I swallowed hard, willing myself to take another step, but the hollow seemed to draw me in, the cold wind wrapping around my arms like chains. A soft scraping noise echoed from deep within the chamber, low and deliberate, almost like nails across stone. I froze, chest tight, my stomach twisting into knots. We backed away slowly, inch by inch, and I noticed something that made my blood run cold. The crevice we had entered through, the narrow passage that had welcomed us, was closing almost imperceptibly, like the rock itself was swallowing us. The walls seemed to bulge slightly inward, edges of stone pressing together with a subtle inevitability. I called out to my friends, trying to stay calm, but my voice was hollow in the cavern, and the wind carried only silence in reply. My own name whispered again, this time directly in my ear, soft but unmistakable. I spun around, and there was nothing. No shadow, no shape, only the cold, the wind, and the sense that the cave had watched us the entire time. Panic clawed at my chest, but still we moved, slowly, desperately, retracing our path. Every step forward felt heavier, as though the air itself resisted our passage. Our headlamps flickered, casting brief, fractured light across the walls, revealing angles that hadn't been there moments before, corners that seemed sharper, more menacing. I tried to steady my breathing, but the cold burned my lungs, and my hands trembled uncontrollably. My friends whispered reassurances, but I could hear the fear in their voices. None of us spoke my name aloud again, not after that whisper had returned it to me in that intimate, haunting tone. Finally, we squeezed back toward the opening, feeling the air gradually warm, the walls finally retreating to their natural position. The moonlight spilled across our path outside, washing away the immediate sense of dread, but it didn't take away the memory. I could still feel the hollow, feel the way the cold wind had pressed against me, the way the shadows had moved independently of the light. Even walking back to the town under the safety of stars and familiar forest, I felt it following, lingering at the edge of perception, a presence I couldn't name or confront. I never returned to that cave. I don't speak of it openly, though the memory is ever present, especially in quiet moments when the wind moves through the hills, carrying the scent of earth and decay. Sometimes, late at night, I swear I hear the faint echo of my own name in the darkness, soft and deliberate, reminding me that some spaces hold onto those who enter, that some passages are meant to trap not the body but the mind. The cave was not merely a hollow in the rock, it was alive, patient, and unyielding, and it marked us in ways we can't fully understand. I will never know what exactly waited in that chamber, and perhaps that is for the best. Some truths are too cold, too heavy, to carry out into the light. The first time we found that cave, it was late afternoon, the sun low and slipping behind the hills, throwing long shadows across the forest floor. The entrance was small, half hidden behind overgrown ferns and a tangle of roots, but the opening yawned into darkness beyond, promising something older and colder than the world outside. I went with two friends, both as curious, and perhaps as foolish, as I was, and together we squeezed through the narrow stone gap, the air inside hitting us like a wall. It smelled of damp earth, mineral-rich, heavy and unchanging, like it had been trapped for centuries. Our boots clattered against jagged rocks, echoing faintly, and every sound seemed amplified, swallowed, and then returned in strange hollow resonance that made my heart jump each time. We moved carefully at first, letting our headlamps sweep across the walls, discovering tunnels that forked and twisted in ways that made me question my sense of direction. The deeper we went, the cooler the air became, until our breaths fogged in the dim light. Somewhere far below, water trickled, or maybe dripped, the sound faint but constant, almost like a pulse under the stone. And then we found it, a hollowed-out chamber, wider than we expected, the ceiling high but shadowed, the walls slick with moisture. In the center, the ground dipped slightly, revealing a pool so still it seemed unnatural, its surface reflecting the faint beams of our flashlights with perfect clarity. I knelt at the edge, the light trembling across the water, and felt a strange stillness settle over us, like we were trespassing on a secret the earth had long kept. As I leaned closer, trying to see the bottom, something moved beneath the surface. Two small points of light glimmered back at me, eyes catching the beam of my flashlight. I froze, pulse hammering, unsure if it was an animal, or some trick of light, or something I couldn't begin to name. I whispered to my friends, pointing, and they recoiled, urging me to step back, their faces pale in the dim glow. But I couldn't. There was something magnetic about the eyes, something patient and intelligent in the way they stayed fixed on me, unblinking, unmoving, yet aware. Every instinct screamed to leave, but a part of me, a dangerous, foolish part, wanted to see more, to understand. We moved around the pool cautiously, keeping our lights trained on the water, but the eyes seemed to follow us, drifting beneath the surface, moving in perfect sync with our steps, always watching. The reflection of our own flashlights danced across the ceiling and walls, and for a moment, I thought I could see shapes in the shadows that weren't mine. A shiver ran down my spine as a cold draft whispered across the chamber, carrying with it the faint smell of wet stone and something older, fouler, almost like decay. My friends urged me again to go, their voices low and shaky, but I couldn't tear my eyes away. I leaned closer still, straining to see what might be under the surface, and the water rippled, though no one had touched it. The eyes disappeared for a heartbeat, then reappeared farther back, just beneath the mirrored surface, as if retreating with deliberation. Panic clawed at my chest. My mind screamed at me to leave, but I couldn't move, rooted to the spot, caught in that impossible gaze. The echoes of our own breaths bounced off the walls, mixing with the subtle sound of dripping water somewhere deeper in the cave. The atmosphere pressed against us, cold and oppressive, like the chamber itself was aware of our intrusion. Finally, I forced myself to step back, and my friends quickly followed. The eyes remained, always just below the surface, glimmering with an intelligence that made the hair on my arms stand on end. We moved toward the narrow exit, but every step felt heavier, as though the cave itself resisted our departure. I kept glancing over my shoulder, half expecting movement that might confirm some unseen presence, some hidden observer we had disturbed. The pool's surface remained perfectly still, the eyes glinting faintly, watching as if to mark our passage. When we finally emerged into the open air, the moon high and pale, the forest silent but for the occasional rustle of leaves, a part of me expected to feel relief. But it didn't come. Even standing beneath the familiar canopy of trees, the memory of that pool lingered, the sense that something had observed us, that the eyes had followed us as far as they could. I kept my gaze toward the cave entrance, heart still pounding, and for a moment, I swore I saw a shimmer beneath the rocks where the water had been, as if something had slipped silently into the shadows to wait. The next days were restless. Sleep came fitfully, haunted by the image of those unblinking eyes, glimmering just beneath a surface that should have been inert. Every creek and hollow in the hills seemed charged with some latent awareness, and even walking near the cave in daylight, I felt that gaze upon me, as if the unseen world below remembered us, remembered my curiosity, and had marked me for it. My friends avoided talking about it, and eventually we stopped mentioning the cave at all. But I cannot erase it from memory. The eyes in that underground pool are never gone. They linger in the periphery of thought, a quiet reminder that even in the familiar hills of our home, there are depths we are not meant to see, presences that watch and wait, patient and deliberate, beyond comprehension. Even now, years later, when I pass the outskirts of that town or hike near the cliffs and hidden hollows, I feel it again. The weight of unseen attention, the prickling of senses that tell me some part of the world below continues to watch, waits for the curiosity of those who wander too close. I don't speak of it often. I can't. But the memory never fades. Those eyes, impossibly still, glimmering beneath that perfect surface, remain lodged somewhere in my mind, a secret that cannot be shared, only feared. The pool is gone to time, perhaps, or perhaps it waits, hidden deeper in shadow, for the next to stumble across it, for the next to meet its unblinking gaze, and to understand the cold, patient scrutiny of what lies beneath. The cave had always been a place of rumors, whispered about by the older folks in our small Appalachian town, though no one dared speak much about it. My brother and I were drawn to it, though not out of recklessness. It wasn't about adventure. It was about escape, about stepping away from the suffocating familiarity of our lives, the way the hills pressed down on everything. That morning, the forest was damp from an overnight mist, each leaf and branch slick, the smell of wet earth strong and sharp. We approached the cave cautiously, boots crunching over hidden roots and loose stones, the air already cooler as we neared its dark mouth. The opening was narrow, a shadowed slit in the hillside, almost inviting us to disappear. We slipped inside, the transition immediate and jarring. The world of sunlight, birds, and breeze vanished, replaced with a damp, oppressive chill. Our headlamps barely cut through the blackness, illuminating walls that pressed close enough for me to feel the rough stone under my palms. Every step echoed, rebounding in strange ways that made it difficult to tell where sound ended and reflection began. The passage tightened quickly, forcing us to crouch, shoulders brushing stone on either side. It was as though the cave itself were alive, inhaling and exhaling around us. Halfway through, I felt it, a subtle pressure in the air, a whisper that drifted through the tight passage. I paused, straining to hear, but it was indistinct, almost drowned out by the pounding of my own heart. Then it came again, closer, more insistent. The whispers weren't words at first, just faint, unintelligible murmurs that seemed to curl around our ears, pressing against the inside of my skull. I looked at my brother, who froze beside me, wide-eyed, gripping the rock walls. The murmurs intensified, urgent now, almost panicked, filling the narrow space so completely it was impossible to tell where they were coming from. Every instinct screamed that we should leave, yet a dangerous curiosity pushed us forward, deeper into the suffocating darkness. I called out, my voice bouncing back in the familiar hollow echo, but the response was different. It was my own words, repeated back at me, distorted, urgent, as though the cave itself was speaking. Panic began to set in. The walls pressed closer, the passage narrowing until every movement required effort, our knees scraping stone, hands catching on jagged edges. The whispers grew louder, threading into my thoughts, repeating phrases I hadn't spoken, mocking my fear. My brother whispered my name, his voice trembling, and I realized he was hearing the same things, though we couldn't see anything that might produce sound. Every step forward felt like wading through molasses. Every breath was icy, heavy, dragging at our lungs. Shadows flickered at the edge of the flashlight beam, shapes that weren't quite shadows, edges that seemed to twist in the darkness. I knew we were being watched, even if nothing could be seen. Finally, instinct overtook curiosity. We scrambled backward, bodies pressed against rock, hands clawing at the walls for grip. The whispers followed, growing softer yet still impossibly present, burrowing into my mind, refusing to let go. My heart pounded, lungs burning, every muscle aching as we pushed through the tight passage. At one point, I stumbled, twisting my ankle on slick stone, and my brother helped me up, both of us nearly falling into the darkness. The cave seemed to narrow even more as we moved, the walls breathing, pulsating in rhythm with our panicked hearts. It felt as though the passage was alive, resisting our escape, reluctant to let us return to the open world. When we finally burst into the open air, the sun had dropped lower, casting long shadows across the forest floor. Relief hit like a physical force, and yet the sense of unease didn't leave. My brother and I sat in the grass, catching our breath, our hands trembling as we ran them through the cold mud on our pants. Even outside, the whispers didn't entirely fade. I swear I could hear fragments of them carried on the wind through the trees, faint but unmistakable. My brother shook his head and laughed nervously, trying to break the tension, but the image of that suffocating passage, the pressure, the voices repeating back our own words, stayed with me. We never returned to that cave. Even years later, I passed near its entrance, hidden among the trees, and my chest tightens, my pulse racing. The memory of those whispers, the way they seeped into the mind, pressing and twisting thoughts, the suffocating closeness of the stone, the claustrophobic air, follows me. I can feel them sometimes in quiet moments, echoes of that day, shadows brushing at the edges of perception, reminders that the cave is still there, patient, alive in some subtle, unknowable way. It watches, waiting, remembering, and though we escaped its immediate grip, I know that some part of it never let go. That suffocating presence, the sound of whispers not quite real but undeniably there, remains lodged in my mind, and it will follow me for the rest of my days. The cave had been a local curiosity for years, tucked away in a remote hollow where the forest pressed in on every side. The older folks in town spoke of it with a kind of wary respect, warning that some places in the hills remembered those who entered and that the shadows could linger long after the travelers left. My friends and I had heard these stories countless times, and we went mostly for the thrill, wanting to see the ancient walls for ourselves. The entrance was wide, jagged stone framing the opening like teeth, the air inside cooler than the late afternoon sun outside. We stepped into the darkness, boots crunching on loose rocks, our headlamps barely cutting a narrow cone through the blackness. The smell was heavy and earthy, damp stone mixed with the faint odor of decayed leaves and time itself. At first, the markings along the walls were fascinating. Strange, weathered etchings faded into the stone, telling stories we couldn't hope to interpret. Lines that curved in impossible ways, symbols we instinctively recognized as warnings, though we didn't understand their meaning. I traced one with my finger, feeling the grooves worn smooth by countless years, when I thought I saw it shift. A flicker at the edge of my peripheral vision, subtle but unmistakable, like the wall itself had breathed. I jerked my head around, shining my light across the chamber, and for a moment everything was still. My friends laughed nervously, saying I was imagining things, but the feeling in my stomach told me otherwise. The shadows along the walls were not static. They moved in ways that didn't match the angle of our lights or the contours of the stone. I tried to convince myself it was just a trick of the light, a reflection, the natural movement of the headlamp across uneven surfaces. But then I turned to get my friends, and they weren't where I had left them. Panic gripped me, cold and sudden, pressing at my chest. I called out, my voice bouncing off the walls, echoing strangely, but the only response was the shifting shadows that seemed to lengthen toward me, stretching along the walls with a deliberate, crawling motion. They weren't just shadows. They were heavy, solid, somehow tangible in the peripheral vision of my mind. The more I watched, the more impossible it became to deny their movement, their purpose. I stumbled back, heart hammering, lungs catching in the damp air. The walls seemed to lean in closer with each step, as if the cave itself had grown alive, aware of my presence and intent on holding me inside. The etchings glimmered faintly in the light, their edges twisting, forming shapes that weren't there a moment before. I tried to keep my headlamp steady, to focus on some rational explanation, but the darkness around me was thick, almost physical, pressing against my skin and my thoughts. Every instinct screamed to run, but the passage twisted unexpectedly, leading me deeper into the labyrinthine chambers. Then I heard it, a soft shuffle almost like footsteps, though too light and irregular to be human. My friends' voices rang faintly, distant, though I could not see them. I turned abruptly, expecting to find them nearby, but the shadows had changed again. They slithered across the walls, approaching in undulating waves, twisting around corners, filling the chamber with the sensation that the air itself was moving with them. I stumbled over uneven rock, my flashlight skidding across the floor, illuminating the markings in fleeting bursts. In that brief light, the etchings seemed to shift once more, forming faces that leered and twisted before vanishing the instant my eyes refocused. The panic escalated. I clawed my way through the rock, tripping over protrusions and loose stones, the crawling shadows following relentlessly, sliding along the walls as if the cave was breathing, alive with some ancient, unknowable intelligence. My voice cracked as I called again, a single word, but the shadows responded almost instantly, stretching and contorting, matching the intensity of my fear. The further I moved, the more the cave seemed to resist, the shadows pressing tighter, forming angles that made it hard to distinguish floor from wall, ceiling from passage. My flashlight flickered, and the darkness seemed to pulse with life, swallowing the light in moments that stretched endlessly. Somewhere along the twisting corridors, I slipped, catching myself on the cold, wet stone. My breath came in ragged gasps, fogging the headlamp, and for a second, I could swear the shadows reached out, solid and cold, brushing against my arm as I scrambled to my feet. The sensation was immediate and visceral, a physical pressure that left my skin tingling and raw. I bolted, following the faint glimmer of daylight I thought I saw far ahead, ignoring the risk of injury, ignoring the way my hands cut against the stone walls. The sounds of my own frantic movements echoed through the cave, mixing with the soft rustle of shadows that mirrored and mocked every step. When I finally emerged into the pale light of afternoon, the air outside felt impossibly warm, almost unnatural after the cold, oppressive corridors. I staggered, heart hammering, hands shaking violently, glancing back at the cave. It sat silently among the trees, its jagged mouth empty, indifferent, as if nothing had followed me. Yet I knew better. The sensation lingered in my bones, the weight of unseen presence, the creeping certainty that the shadows had left a part of themselves behind. I never spoke of what happened to anyone outside my small circle, and my friends avoided returning there. Even now, years later, I feel it sometimes, when the forest is quiet and the wind moves just right through the hollows. The memory of those shifting, crawling shadows presses at the edges of perception, a reminder that the cave was never empty, that the walls had watched and moved with a deliberate purpose, and that some places, no matter how well mapped or understood, hold a memory of those who trespass. The fear doesn't fade. It simmers beneath the surface, subtle and unyielding, a quiet proof that even in the daylight, the shadows may still linger, patient, deliberate, and waiting.